It is episode 112, a well overdue episode 112. I am Michael Askins, architect and technologist, and this is IT Pro Tech Talk. And in the studio, returning champ and professor, Chris Seferlis. How you doing, Chris?
That's right. Good. How's it going, Mike?
Doing well, doing well. Thanks again for jumping back on. Want to give a little bit of an update to everyone. We did an episode not too long ago where we've been. There were some business changes and our landmark sponsor change. We came back for a little bit and then all of a sudden we were quiet for December. So I want to let you all know what's been going on. Well, the holidays came and so did the flu. So that kind of crushed us a little bit between myself and Dev and some of our guests we were teeing up in our year end. It was always a combination of balls in the air, who can be where and when and how. And everybody was just like crushed under the weather. So we are now back and better than ever. And what a better way to kick off 2023 than with our returning champ, Chris. How you been? What have you been up to?
Yeah, it's exciting, man. It's I feel like it's been a really long time, actually. So yeah, a lot of irons in the fire as usual. I've got 14 of the 15 chapters written for the book.
Nice.
So we're just writing the conclusion now, finishing up a couple of tech examples. So that should be done very, very shortly here. Finish up the editing process and hopefully have it all published optimistically by end of February, early March, maybe. Kind of depends on the publisher. So that's pretty exciting. Wrapped up a really successful semester at Boston University, taught a class called data mechanics. I think given the recurring theme, it seems like a pretty good natural fit for what we've talked about a lot of times, right? And put a lot of focus on understanding, beyond the technology piece, but really understanding what it means to have good data, clean data, and what it takes to get that. I'm teaching in the School of Computing and Data Science to undergrad, and really as a data science major, you're just doing a lot more of the algorithmic work, the statistics, doing some Python programming, and really more of those open source framework tools. But it doesn't have as much of a focus on, the data lineage and the data cleansing and a lot of those aspects of it. And so got the opportunity to really shape young minds, as they say, right?
Yep.
They welcome me back coming up for this spring semester as well. So, that's been really great. And then, just same thing, went through the holidays, had COVID for the first time in, 2+ years or whatever it was. But we all survived that as well. And
Yep.
It's been busy, but really good.
Yeah, definitely been busy. And, it's good to hear that your classes went well, your courses went well. And, the one thing I don't know, I just thought of this as you were talking. Did you look yourself up on Rate My Teacher?
I did. My name wasn't in there yet.
Okay.
So I was actually thinking about that yesterday. I got to go back in and see if anybody put it in there. Actually, I'm still waiting to get my feedback from last semester too. Cause the students have their own, internal for Boston University, they have their own rating system, and I'm supposed to get access to that at some point, just like everything else. And I think I've come across this same way, in the time that we've spent together on various, platforms, is that, if I've got an opportunity to improve, I want to know about it. Right. And so, it kind of goes along with that growth mindset, never stop learning, whatever hashtag you want to throw in there. Right. It's
NoHurtButts.com.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, you just got to kind of keep doing it. And so I'll be really curious to see. I did get a lot of positive feedback from students over email, in person, and things like that. So that's always helpful. Any kind of positive, affirmation that I'm doing the right thing, really, really kind of helps motivate even further.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's worth noting that when you speak and you do stuff, and I'm sure you've had this too. I was out in Seattle. This is a while ago now because, travel and we do things remote more so than ever. I was sitting in the airport, and I'm an East Coaster, so you get these really weird times and flights, and so I
Oh
had a
yeah.
long time to kill, and I'm sitting out there, and I'm just like working on my Surface Book. I was actually writing an article, and this person, I never seen them before in my life, they walk up and like, "Oh, I really enjoy your content and your show." Like
Yeah.
I
Wow.
really appreciated the feedback and I loved it. And it's just the
Yeah.
most surreal thing ever when that happens. And I'm just so appreciative of our audience and our crowd. It got to be even more satisfying when you are looking at the faces every day and then they come
Right.
up to you. So congrats to you again on that, because that's,
Yeah.
you
Thanks.
know, yeah, it's just awesome. And it's good to hear the book's progressing, and Microsoft's
Slowly.
progressing. Yeah. The one thing I want to bring up, I had this note for the last time, and I didn't really, we always kind of like lean to you for the data stuff. I mean, you're a technologist, you're a cloud person, you're an on-premises data center person. So, we're going to talk around some data stuff now, but let's put the lens of, if there's other things other than data, feel free to throw it out there, because you are a true architect at heart and a technologist. So we appreciate your input in these and the other areas too as well. So we want to include everybody's experiences, and with organizations trying to be a little more nimble, sometimes they're leaning on people with multiple skill sets. I mean, you got gobs of skill sets, and it got me thinking, how do we do more with less with data, and how do we be more cost effective with data? There's things we can do in Azure. If you're in Azure, most platforms have some sort of a component around what we're going to discuss, but there's like cost controls, there's billing solutions, the old Cloudin, which is now part of Azure. You can actually use Azure and look at your AWS and GCP and get an understanding of your costs. But there's things we can do as people deploying and architecting solutions to try to be a little more cost effective. Is there anything that comes top of mind for you in that space?
Yeah. And real quickly, I'll say, having changed roles about a year ago, and getting the opportunity to step sort of outside of that Azure specific lens to be able to kind of zoom out a bit, looking at all three clouds, Dynamics, Office Cloud, if you will, and the Azure cloud, and to start getting a grasp on what all of those data solutions in each of those clouds are. My goal for 2023 is to start publishing more of that content, to be able to talk about things like the common data platform, the Dataverse area, and then of course the advances in our first party total analytics tool and Synapse and stuff like that. And so look forward to that content coming out. It's been a long time coming, with the book and everything like that. But once I can turn my focus, I'm really looking forward to diving into more of that to help, our customers to really get a better grasp on what we're doing. But, specific to your question, I think the biggest piece of advice that I give to all of our customers, and I probably mention it in every single chapter of the book, is to just start slow. Everybody wants to just, use all the tools and play with all the techniques and, turn all this stuff on. But, the real challenge is that costs money, and so when we start with a POC and we have that ability, or proof of concept, we have that ability to really get a good grasp on what the costs are, where they're coming from, right? If it's compute related, so you're turning on Synapse, you're turning on Spark, Databricks, Azure Data Explorer, any kind of database product, any of that stuff, that's where the real cost is. Storage is really inexpensive. Networking is really inexpensive, and those types of things. But one thing that we did in the semester was a semester long project that involved, essentially building a small scale analytical environment to analyze COVID data. and I worked with the students to essentially have them look at, I don't know, it was probably 30 different data points of responses to the COVID outbreak, and how they, what measures they would take based on the data that they had as it related to, fatalities, people contracting the virus, as well as, being able to recover from it. And so to start things off, it was just teaching them how to turn stuff off when they weren't using it, right? How to pause the compute, how to use serverless options instead of persisted solutions. Not every different object or tool in the Azure environment can be turned off or paused from a compute perspective. But in reality, when you think about things like virtual machine or Cosmos DB or SQL or Synapse, many of those can either be scaled way back when they're not being used, or run as serverless, or just completely turned off. And one thing to evaluate when you start to think about serverless versus persisted is that when you use serverless on a whatever you want to call it, per cycle, per minute, per hour, per month basis, if you're using it all the time, it is definitely going to cost you more than if you are provisioning compute for that period of time, whatever it happens to be. If you're using it all the time. And so that's a part of an evaluation when you're looking at, whatever the workload is you're looking to deploy, is this sort of is it a part-time tool, right? Is it, is it an expense report tool that, is going to see the highest amount of demand at the end of the month, when people are filling out their time cards or whatnot? Is it a reporting analytics tool that, you really want to see all the reports at the beginning of the month from the prior month, and all those details, right? For the larger reports, some of those big honking paginated reports that take 20 minutes, half hour, 2 hours to generate, right?
Yeah.
And so it's keeping perspective on what that project looks like, and evaluating those options as they're available.
I absolutely agree with that. And I'm smiling here because I just had a conversation for the day job, and one of the things that they did was they went in their blades when they deployed all their VMs, including their SQL boxes, and they wanted to be cost conscious, so they checked that box like shut off at night. And they're complaining that like in the morning nothing works. Well, you're shutting it off. You have to turn it back on, and it's, there's things we can do to turn off and turn on, like there's run books and different types of automation tools. I'm a big fan of, configuration management with Bicep, and, you can do ARM templates, and you can always do that shutdown, but it's the turning on part that you got to remember to do,
Right. And it's interesting because, that's a common request from people is, okay, great, you've got the ability to shut this off, but how do I turn it on?
Yeah.
I don't want my controller to have to go into the Azure portal to be able to turn on his virtual machine that he's using. But so commonly, like you said, automation components, using runbooks in Azure Automate, as well as simple things like just a very, very basic Power App that allows you to run a script, to turn that on, things like that. And I think that because people hear that it's in the cloud, there's almost like a disconnect that they don't consider those types of options, because it's almost like a mental block where they say, well, that's in the cloud, I can't touch that. And it's just like, well, it's just an extension of your data center, really, or it's your data center, right? It's not even an extension for a lot of customers nowadays, because they're just going all cloud all the time. It's a big blocker for people sometimes when they just can't knock down that wall, if you will.
this is the for the I'm holding up my
Sure.
phone. This is your friend for the
Yeah.
cloud for turning things on, like especially if you have like commodity things or development side things, this touch, turn it on, and
Yeah.
and you can run, PowerShell from your phone now. You can run Bash from your phone. There's
I don't
so
want
much
the
you can do.
controller doing that though.
That's true. Very
Right.
true.
But with the Power Apps being deployed so easily and being able to just tie those scripts in,
Yep.
we're not talking about really, really heavy programming or anything like that, right? I mean, it's something that can be built in a very, very short amount of time. They can design it themselves because it's designed for them to be able to build their own pages and whatnot. And so, yeah, maybe you got to tie a little bit of code to the background of it. There's just an absolute ton of samples and different options out there on the web. Quick search can yield pretty much anything you need.
Absolutely. Scope your PowerShell to your subscription, and then do a get a VM command, and then start a VM command, and you're off and running. Yeah. That's a good idea. One of the things too, from a cost perspective, and I've had this conversation with clients, historically more along the lines towards the mid-tier and lower organizations, but we're starting to have them with the mid-tier to enterprise organization of like, we're spending a lot of money with Microsoft. Is there anything they can do for us? It's like, services are services. They cost what they cost, but there are services that Microsoft offers that are always free. And some of those address the situations that, we're talking to. Like, there's some components of Azure Monitor that are free. Cost control and billing and budgeting is always part of your subscription.
Right.
But there are also, database platforms that have components around that. And I called up the list here earlier for a customer we're doing an engagement with. And they have some small, really lightweight databases, and they're like, I don't want to have to stand up a server. And I was like, well, you don't have to. You can just, you can put it on a free tier for Cosmos DB, because I'm looking here, you get like 1,000 request units per second, 25 gig of storage. I mean, that is great, right? And then you look at open source DBs that are supported inside of Microsoft Azure. It's just, there's so many options out there to try to be smart with how your spend is. But also, one of the things I always mention is, you can be smart with your spend, but it can also hurt you if you're not careful about the technical requirements. So yes, be smart with your spend, but make sure it's solving the technical need too. Have you seen a lot of movement towards open source, or?
We've probably mentioned it before, 2/3 of the Azure cloud is on open source, whether it be, a different flavor of Linux, whatnot. Right. And then on, to your point, open source database options, Postgres, MariaDB, MySQL, Cassandra, there's a bunch of them that are now platform services. So, you don't have to worry about the care and feeding as much. And of course, SQL Server, right? We don't want to leave that one out, but but with those managed services, those managed options, right? It kind of takes all the standing up of the services, the securing, the replication, the high availability, all those things that normally you have to put a lot of time and effort into to make sure it's exactly how you want it. Now it's just a configuration when you're deploying the service or after the fact, and a lot of them have serverless options, as we're referred to, and then you spoke of Cosmos, and you think about the options there with Cosmos, and you get 1,000 request units, resource units for free, if you will. But then if you've got an application that requires more, right, you can always use the auto scale feature, right, and that's going to also help you with your cost controls. Now, Cosmos is a pretty sophisticated tool. the configuration options are bountiful, right? You've just got a ton of options and ways it can be deployed when you think about partitioning and replications, and indexing and all that kind of stuff. And so Cosmos is not necessarily for the faint of heart, right? That's one of those tools that you really want to work with an expert before just spinning it up. One of the big knocks against Cosmos is that it's expensive, right? And I'm putting that in virtual quotes here as I say it. And it's oftentimes considered expensive because, quite frankly, people aren't doing their homework to make sure that they're optimizing it out of the gate, right?
Yeah.
If you don't need to replicate, to 5 different data centers, then don't. If you don't have to multi-master in different data centers, then don't. If you don't need to index some, archive data, or if your most important stuff is only going to be 30 days old, then don't index the rest, right? And create rules around that kind of stuff that a lot of people miss. And so I know that there's a ton of material out there about optimizing Cosmos, but where it's so flexible, customers just automatically want to turn it on, throw everything at it, and away we go. And then they come back, a month or two later, and they're like, well, what is this? Just because the costs are unwieldy, and so that's one of those where, and Synapse has some similarities. It's the beauty, but also the challenge of having such a flexible platform where you really have so much control as to how it gets deployed, what configurations you're using, what components you're using, that if you don't know what you're doing, you can really, really cost yourself a lot of money.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Now, if only we had a way to put a cost control wrapper around Redis. I still haven't figured that out. Redis cache, and that can be a tough one, right?
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen some advancements with Redis, right? It's been a little bit here, but I know that we had some exclusive partnerships with Redis from more of an enterprise perspective for things like replication, high availability, and stuff like that. And so we've got a pretty good partnership with those guys. And so you can expect to see better controls over that type of stuff in the future, as well as, anybody who's seen any of the recent advancements with Synapse and stuff, we're going to see a lot more cost control around those things. So yeah, it's coming. It's there's only so many developers on the team. There's only so much they can do over the course of a sprint, right? So it's whatever the highest priority thing is at the time.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot to get your hands around: data lakes, Delta lakes, blob storage sitting out here, serving up tables. There's so many different options and things to do. And, one of the things I'm a big fan of is, reevaluating the speed of the cloud. We've mentioned this here a gazillion times. The speed of the cloud is truly amazing, right? We do orders of magnitude from like features and things that are out there, and we democratize IT and take all these really cool things and make it available for everyone. There's different tiers for different services. So, we're out there doing the work and making sure that everyone understands. But sometimes from an enterprise side or from a core mid-tier size, you got to stop. You got to take a breath and see what you're doing and make sure that you're mapping your future state to what you have now. Because I've worked with organizations, and I know you have too, that they're just perpetually migrating from one platform to another because they can't seem to get their hands around the architecture, or for whatever reason they're doing it. But stopping to understand what you have, what you're spending, what your true needs are, solve the business problem with technology. Don't apply the business to the technology you want to deploy out there. And you'll find, even though some of those really cool things you want to do and some of those cool services, they might not apply. But who's to say you can't stand up a lab and play with them and see if there is a value there. And that's one of the takeaways that I would like our listeners to know is yes, reevaluate your environment, be smart, be cost conscious. That doesn't mean you have to sacrifice innovation. You can spend a small amount of money for a lab or a dev environment and work on with a smaller set of resources to figure it out. You don't want to throw an expensive solution at something and then try to figure it out as you go. So, being smart with how you apply your technology is another way we can really be cost conscious from a data perspective. And that is like also, keeping an eye on what key things are important to you out of your data platforms. It's more than just making sure you're not spiking CPUs and you have enough log space. It's what is the important thing to keep things going. I'm more of a data center infra guy, and so I look at hey, let's look at IOPS. Let's look at how can we like serve data faster and better. Is there anything that you would recommend people look at to try to keep an eye on a metric? I think in the show notes I sent over is like keeping a keen eye. Like what are some of the key things we want to look at?
Yeah, and everything that you just described really comes back to understanding your business objectives, right? And what is it that you're trying to deploy? What are those needs that you have? And then what are the nice to haves, right? And being able to go through the process of evaluating, what are those needs and nice to haves, comparing them side by side, that can help you deploy a more controlled environment. Now, beyond that, the first party Azure tools are fantastic. Azure Monitor, you can tie it into the logging to be able to detect any kind of anomalies or security risks or misconfigurations. You name it. You've got some great visualization aspects to be able to kind of dig into that. But in the true Microsoft fashion, we can't scale, we can't grow, we can't offer the best service to our customers without our partners, right? And so, when you think of some of our closer partners that are doing some amazing things with the platform and really tapping into services, partners like Datadog and Dynatrace, and there's a few others out there that, these are Microsoft independent software vendor partners, right? And these guys have offerings in the marketplace where you can tap into just about any service in Azure. And oh, by the way, you can also combine that stuff with what's on-prem and other clouds, and really get a good understanding of what's happening in the environment to make sure that you're not overspending on cost, right? It's interesting because you get a lot of teams that want to establish a budget, understandably, right? I mean that's an edict from finance. You need to know your budget. But they just build a POC and don't have an idea of what that budget's going to be, right? And so it's like, well, if you don't build it to your spec and what you need to accomplish with this, it's really hard to develop what that budget looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Further, one last point on that, right? So you were talking about scale, right? And how much space do you need for logs and those types of things, and this is another, I think, misstep that customers have is remembering that, you essentially have limitless scale, right? Now, mind you, we do have use cases that push those limits, right? Of course we do. But, for the majority of projects and workloads out there, you're going to be able to scale your environment to what you need over time. And so, even if you start at a lower tier virtual machine, for instance, you're deploying a VM, or a lower tier compute, for any of the data services, there are always steps to migrate, right? There are always steps to, even if that particular tier you're in doesn't support what you might need to do in the future, you can always migrate to it and do something a little bit different, right? So I think, getting started, start with your POC, make some assessments as to what you're going to need. You're probably going to over provision anyway, right? Just to be safe and make sure that you're satisfying the needs. But then after you've got it all done, go back and evaluate and see where you're at for CPU usage, memory usage, disk usage, things like that. So you can scale back. And then when you need more compute, it's there.
Move the slider to the right, as we say, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned one of the ISV partners, Dynatrace, and so I'd be remiss to say, for transparency purposes, the day job Solutions for Networks, our primary sponsor here, we're actually partners with Dynatrace, and
Mhm.
some of the output that in the onboarding that we did to become partners, it was a real eye opener on the capabilities that are there natively sitting on that platform. Is like the visibility and tying into all those solutions. A lot of people looked at it as like an AppD kind of a replacement, but it's so much more than that, right? AppD was, it solves a particular challenge, but when we look at what Dynatrace has offered and what the wrappers are for that, you're looking at everything from operational functionality to code level functionality, finding out where things are breaking, understanding capabilities as it is transactionally on the systems you're deploying there. And that kind of insight makes an organization smarter to make those choices without the whole for our audio only listeners, like lick the finger, put it in the air, that whole like let's look at some logs and try to get what is the biggest thing ever going on right now, because we need to have all this stuff thrown at it because we think we're at capacity or we're projecting. Well, let's use real data to try to determine that.
Right.
And that's one of the things I love about it. And for some reason, my notifications are going off and I have them turned off.
I know. I was gonna ding you on that one.
And I think I know why that is, because I have a few people on my list that are those exceptions. They can message you even if you're like, and it seems to be that that's the case. So apologies to our listeners that have to listen into the dinging there. But kind of putting a wrapper around some of our core theme here for today is, how do we handle, runaway services? And runaway services happen in a couple different vectors from, and I'm sure you can probably tell me some others, but the vectors I typically see are, and no offense to our developer friends, but developers, they like what they like, and they want to be enabled to do things. So they just kind of like put that gas pedal down, or they don't put it in first or second gear. They go straight to fifth because they want the juice to be able to have their solution perform. And I understand that. And again, to our developer friends, this is not a criticism. It's a challenge that as a business we want to kind of come to a common ground on. Another vector I see is that services will get stood up without the understanding of its capabilities, and it'll get replicated over time throughout an organization. And next, you have 2 or 3 instances of that. Whereas you can be a little more smart on how you do things. Can you have databases on a SQL server sitting in Azure, or do you need to have an individual SQL server with a database on each one? Because I see that so often when we're doing an analysis. It's so. Saying no to someone or maybe moving their cheese and making them feel bad is not something we want to do. We want to give them and enable them. What are you seeing from runaway services? Is there anything to keep an eye out that you can think of?
Well, I think, your developer comment really kind of rings true in that what we run into is we almost have a natural bias to what we're comfortable with. And so rather than evaluating all options to see what's going to be most efficient and effective, we just kind of go with what we know, right? And that can be a problem, right? If you can perform your transformations on a data pipeline using Spark with a Spark cluster, and everything is available there, that might be more efficient than using Azure Data Factory, for instance, right? Where, those GUI tools and whatnot, they cost you money, right? Because there's development cost that goes along with that. And so it's really taking, again, that step back to be able to evaluate what are your options. And if you don't have the firsthand knowledge of a particular service or tool, do a little bit of homework, right? Yes, it's going to cost you a little bit more money up front, from a time perspective, But ultimately, there's an ROI for that, where you can say, actually, if we, invest whatever, a week's worth of training into this other technology, it can cost us a significant amount of money over the course of the year. Oh, and by the way, you get to learn something new, right? And that's one of the biggest motivating factors for employees these days. Do they have the opportunity to learn new stuff, right? Or are they just stuck doing the same old mundane, it can be very, very motivating for people. So, I think that's one of the things is really look at all the options that are available for various services to be able to run what they need to run. I can't count how many customers have spun up, the enhanced Spark engine, Microsoft partner, first party partner, versus like the Synapse Spark services, right? Where you're paying a premium for that enhanced Spark engine from our partner, but if you're not using it for everything that it is, it's probably not worth the money. And oh, by the way, that compute is running all the time and can be very, very expensive because you're not decoupling it, right? But if you decouple it, by using Synapse instead, maybe that's a better option. So a lot of it comes down to requirements. If there is a requirement to, upskill on a specific technology to get a better handle on it, it might be worth that investment. And most likely it is, just given that, we're replacing a lot of the hardware that we're using normally on our premises with these services in the cloud. But the majority of them can be spun up on-prem just for testing and dev purposes.
Makes complete sense to me. We have a very similar conversation when we start looking at like logic apps and how you're going to handle logic apps and functions. Do we put it on a consumption tier, or do you put it like, where do you put it at? A lot of people go straight for, like, they don't want to be hampered or have to configure it later, so they're going right for the top tier option. Right. And it's like, let's be a little smart with it. But I think this is all great stuff. Anything else you want to add to our conversation today?
Yeah, I mean, so when you think about, stepping outside of the specific data comments, right, in those aspects, it's really true of, the cognitive services piece, where many of the services, if not all, can be containerized, where it's going to be very similar to what you're running. So you can deploy that on premises. I think it's about 2/3 of them can be containerized at this point. Then the other piece is that most of them have that free tier. And if you look at the pricing, it's going to tell you the exact differences between free and standard and premium, right? And so look at what those options are, and it's just like, okay, I can only do 1,000 renders per month on the free tier. Well, for your POC, you're probably not doing more than that, right? Now, you're eventually probably going to do some load testing, to verify the architecture and things like that. But you're not going to do that out of the gate. And again, migrating to that next tier is usually pretty straightforward.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not like you're going to run chaos against it and like totally, load test it right from the get go. So do more with less. We're that cloud adoption framework engagement we have with a customer right now. We're moving them to Azure, and they're like, well, how much do I need to get going here? Because we're getting ready to prepare their landing zone. I'm like, you don't need anything. They're like, what are you talking about? I was like, well, you need a credit card to back the account, just to set up the subscription. But I mean, you're not going to get billed for anything. They're like, how is that? I was like, well, first of all, there's so many things out there that we need to set up and configure that will not cost you anything right now. So why would we want to, prepay for, reserved instances for machines 2 months before we actually need them? So let's get the
not knowing what those requirements are.
Exactly. It gives you time too. The baked in security stuff that's in there gives you time to like get your role-based access controls and all this other stuff like laid out properly. So that's, let's be smart with it from inception all the way through, delivery.
Yeah, well, I think the cost management tools are critically important. We've talked about them some, but when you think about running some tags in your environment to know what you're looking at, and then, you know, setting up simple budgets and alerts, right? It's amazing how many customers don't even do that, right? It's
Yeah.
just, and you know, I mean, as soon as I got my Azure environment deployed for my students, it's the first thing I did was, okay, let me know when I hit 25% of my budget. Let me know when I hit, you know, 50% of my budget, just to make sure that I'm very much aware of what's happening. And then if I see an alert where it's like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense, you know, I can go and find out what's happening in the environment to see where that cost is coming from.
When you have day 2 and you have a budget set up, you have day 2 into the month, and you're already at 75% of your budget.
Yeah,
Something ain't
yeah,
right.
exactly. What's wrong?
Yep.
So,
And it's not easy to get that money back. I can tell you that for sure.
right.
You spend
Right.
it, you spend it, right?
Yeah, and you know, I mean, we've had, you know, cases where hundreds of thousands of dollars were burnt because somebody wasn't paying attention. They over provisioned something, and then they come back and say, you know, well, it was a mistake. And just like, well, we understand that, but you were also using that, you know, so it's like, you know, it's kind of hard to walk that back. And then I've seen other cases where, you know, the customer, you know, either had an outage and you know, they get the money back from that, or you know, there is a misconfiguration, there's a bug, you know, and so if there's ever a question about it, you can definitely very easily set up a billing, you know, a billing support request to have it looked at, you know, and it opens a regular support ticket just like everything else, and it kind of goes and you give your justification and all that. And so there are options there, but you're right, it's not necessarily straightforward as to whether or not you'll get it back.
Yep, absolutely. Anything else you want to add today?
No, that's it, man. You know, glad to be back on the horse, and hopefully we can get back to it more regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited because, you know, voice is back. I can talk. Everybody's getting back
helps.
and healthy. Yeah, it definitely does. We have a whole list already scheduled out. We got you teed up. We got some solutions for networks, architects teed up for around some integration of Cisco with Microsoft Teams. We have a whole suite of good stuff coming down the line, but I do got a couple housekeeping things. Again, normally we say this at the top of the hour. I will prepend this for those who listen to the audio. Again, this show's for information and entertainment purposes only. Consult your professional before attempting any of this stuff that we talk about. Make sure that these technical topics we talk about apply to your specific environment. Specific environments are unique. And a change for one organization or inside of the same organization might not mean the same thing elsewhere. So make sure you consult your professional, make sure you do your due diligence in looking up to make sure it applies for you. The other bit of housekeeping, again, I would like to thank Solutions for Networks for helping sponsor this and making this this show possible, and getting good people like Chris, Professor Chris, as we should say, start calling you the prof. Yeah. That's what we should do. You're not returning champion. You're just the prof now.
Okay,
but we really appreciate the time to be able to do this and help us get the messaging out of what can help you. So at any time, feel free to respond in comments. We post these all through social. A lot of people hit me direct. When I say respond in comments, I usually get like a lot of direct messages. You know, I was looking for like open banter, but if you don't want to do that and you feel uncomfortable doing that, feel free to keep hitting me up directly. And I know Chris is very available too. Not that I'm putting you on the hook, but I do know you're very active.
I mean, you know, I've got videos I published 2 years ago. People will comment on them, and I'll go back and respond. You know, I mean, you know, and some of the comments are relevant, others are not. You know, but it's kind of the nature of it. You know, and you know, I try to be very available on social. You know, always looking to connect with people and you know, help out ways that I can. I definitely do mentoring and things like that if people need help. So yeah, no, definitely feel free to reach out. You know, put some comments out there. And if you're comfortable doing it in front of other people, you know, it's great because you get other people to be able to chime in and, you know, maybe somebody else is running into it and they're just afraid to ask. Right. So you're probably helping somebody by doing so.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. On that note, that's a great way to wrap it up. Engage with us because we're here for you, and we'll hear you, listen to you, see you on the next go around. And again, we always appreciate you as listeners and viewers. The more likes, thumbs ups, views, and subscriptions we get, the better it is for us to keep this moving forward and have this sponsorship. So please subscribe, like wherever you get podcasts. This show's widely available. The other one's not so widely available, but this one's widely available. So hit those buttons. Appreciate it. And we'll talk to you in the next go. Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.